Hi, welcome to my video on further explanation of an even partial conic function. This is number 2. Again, it's partial conic. It's a half of the original conic. And let me explain. F of x equals the square root of x squared plus 4. We'll draw the graph after on this grid, but is it even or odd? So we do the f of negative x. Square root of negative x squared plus 4. And negative x squared is the same as x squared. And this square root of x squared plus 4 is the same as here. So that's the f of x. So that means, because the f of negative x is equal to the f of x, it's even, and hence it's reflected in the y-axis, and we'll explain that after we draw our graph. So the equation is y equals x squared plus 4, square root of x squared plus 4. So if we do the y-intercept, where x is equal to 0, y is equal to 0 squared plus 4. Square root of 4, 2. So the y-intercept, x is 0 and y is 2. X is 0 and y is 2. Now, find the x-intercept when we make y equal to 0. 0 equals the square root of x squared plus 4. We square both sides. 0 equals x squared plus 4. So we square this side and we square this side. So x squared equals negative 4 and x equals plus or minus the square root of a negative 4. So that means that that's square root of 4 is 2. That's an I, is an imaginary number. So there's no x-intercepts in this graph. So this graph will not cut through the x-axis. It'll stay up here. And that's interesting. Let's look at it. Let's look at what we call the domain. The domain is the values of x. And the domain is the values of x. So that means that x squared plus 4 is underneath the root. So that got to be greater than 0 or equal to 0. If we say it has to be greater than or equal to, okay, but it can't be greater than, it can't be equal to 0, so it's got to be greater than 0. Why? This has to be, well, but let's say it's greater than or equal to 0. What's underneath the root? Got to be greater than or equal to 0. That means that if this is a 4, x squared is positive. So that means that x squared plus 4 has got to be greater than 0 because it can't be equal to 0. So if x squared is positive and you add 4 to it, it's still positive, so it can't be equal to 0. So that means this number underneath here got to be greater than 0. That means x belongs to the reals. All the values of x are going to fit into this equation because of the x squared. There's no, you can't get a negative. Now, what about the range? Well, let's look at the range. If the values of x are greater than 0, that means the values of y, according to this equation, if this is 0, then if I could have 0, then I would have a square root of 4. So the values of y are positive. So the values of y are greater than or equal to 2. So it's the range. So that means this function is going up here somehow. But how does it go? Well, let's do the trick again by looking at the equation and seeing where it comes from. So let's square both sides. So we get y squared is equal to x squared plus 4. So that means y squared minus x squared is equal to 4. So in the previous video we had y squared plus x squared equals 4, which means we made a circle. But notice we have a negative. So that means that if we let x equal 0, we find the y-intercepts. So the y-intercepts is when we let x equal 0. So we have, if x is 0, we have y squared is equal to 4. So y is equal to plus or minus square root of 4, which is 2. So that means we have x is 0, 2. And y-intercept is plus or minus 2, right? Let's continue. I was looking at this one where I had just a 2, but because I squared both sides, I picked up both intercepts. So that means, what do I have? So what about, we know it has no x-intercepts because of what I did here, but what is this? Let's go to here. Notice, because x is negative, if I let y equal 0, I get a negative x squared is 4, so I have an imaginary number. So what we have is y squared over 1 minus x squared over 1 equals 4. Because we have no x-intercepts and y-intercepts, we have a hyperbola. And the hyperbola here has a center of 0, 0, because there's no brackets on the x squared or y squared. But a hyperbola has asymptotes. Y equals plus or minus b over ax. B over ax because the center is 0, 0. So this is b squared and this is a squared. So plus or minus, if a squared is 1, then a is 1. If b squared is 1, b is 1. So the asymptotes is plus or minus 1x. So if you think about it, we have asymptotes that have a y-intercept of 0, and it goes y equals x means you have a slope of 1. So you're up 1, right 1, up 1, right 1. So we have asymptotes going through like this, and the other one is negative. So we go up 1, left 1. So it's right here, up 1, left 1. So the other asymptote is here. There it is. So this one is y equals x. This one is y equals negative x. And hyperbolas go, this hyperbola has a y-intercept of 2. So it goes out towards the asymptote like this. But it has y-intercept of 2, but it doesn't have negative 2. So it's a half of a parabola, but it's the upper half. Notice this is a plus, so it's the upper half. So if we did, again, if we did y equals negative square root of x squared plus 4, that would be, if you draw that, that would be like this. So if that was a negative, the y would be negative, so it would have, that's negative 2 there, so it would do this, be down here, be the other part. This is the lower part because the negative, this is the positive one, so that's the upper part. So again, this is the equation of a hyperbola to explain, and this is how because I squared both sides and worked backwards, I found it was a hyperbola, and it was the upper half of the hyperbola, and the other part is the lower half with the negative. So we took this hyperbola and solved it for y. So we took this hyperbola and solved it for y. You get y squared equals 4 plus x squared. So the square root of y squared is y, and the square root here is plus minus the square root. So when I take the hyperbola and solve for y, I get the plus part, which is the upper, I get the minus part, which is the lower. So you can see that this is a hyperbola. And notice that if we take these points, this point right here and this one, they're the same. So it's reflected. If you take a -2 and plug it in, you get this point. Plug a -2 in, you get this point. So again, if you plug 1 in, you get root 5. 1 squared is 1, you get a root 5. Put 1 in, root 5, and root 5 is 2 point something. And if you put a -1 in and square it, you get 1, you get a root 5. So you can see it's reflected in the y-axis. And that brings us to the end of this video. Notice I did part conics, in other words, the upper or lower half of the conic. That's what I mean by partial. Click on the like button if you like the video, and the subscribe button. Visit my math website, www.mathfullyexplained.com, to find more information about me, my videos, and the content. That's the content on my YouTube channel called Math Fully Explained, just one word. Thank you for viewing my video. Hope the video helped you. Bye-bye.